Welcome into the CHGO Blackhawks podcast presented by PointsBet. Use promo code CHGO when you sign up and you'll get 2 risk-free bets up to $2,000. But don't forget, with a $50 or more first-time deposit, you'll get that free CHGO membership, access to all of our great written content, and even a free t-shirt from the CHGO locker. $2,000 in free bets, a free CHGO membership, a free t-shirt from the CHGO locker. All that for making a $50 or more first-time deposit at PointsBet. I'm Jay Zawaski with Greg Boysen and Mario Tirabassi as always. And joining us here in our West Loop studios is the Chicago Tribune's Phil Thompson. Phil, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming down. I know it's a busy week for all of us, draft week and free agency and prospects camp next week. So thanks for making the time for us today.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, guys.
There's a ton to get to.
Yes.
Where do we begin?
Something big's coming up, right?
I've heard something. Yeah.
I think the draft, something about
like
that.
that.
Yeah.
It's we're having a pizza party here tomorrow. That's the big news.
That's the big news. Yeah.
That's what's important. Priorities, gentlemen.
Yes.
Priorities.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. We have heard, months really leading up to this date about ways the Hawks could try to get into the first round. And while you're here, Phil, we've been talking about it for weeks. Let's get your thoughts on the Alex DeBrincat situation. Do you think Alex DeBrincat will be traded? Do you think Alex DeBrincat should be traded? What sort of parameters have you created for yourself in terms of that situation?
Oh, wow. I have come around to the fact that he probably should be traded if Davidson can get a king's ransom. And I've seen some of the reported offers that have been made, like high-round picks with prospects, and they have been rejected, which I think is the right call. If you're going to trade away who is the centerpiece of your franchise, then you need to get, as I said, a king's ransom.
Yeah, that's kind of exactly how we feel here. I think we've talked ourselves into, like, it's okay as long as Elliot Freeman put it, and we've been using the term too, as long as you wreck another franchise to get it. Like, you
got to ruin a franchise to make this kind of deal.
You have to make the other fan base go absolutely crazy. Like, why did we do this in order to do it? And it seems that's what's happening. If these reports that we're getting are true, and based on the people who are putting them out there, there's no reason to believe. When Elliot Freeman says something's happening, it's probably happening. So if he's rejecting big-time offers already, then I think Blackhawk fans can feel a little more at ease. Sure, it's not going to be a popular decision if Alex DeBrincat gets traded, but we already learned that Kyle Davidson has no problem making unpopular trades if it makes the long-term picture a brighter one. So I think we're in good hands. There's still time to prove us wrong. But I think we're in good hands where he's like, I'm only going to do this if it takes a year off this rebuild, at least a year off this rebuild.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think too, with what we've been seeing about these reports and rumors, if the Philadelphia report that the Flyers were in on it until the 5th overall pick was thrown in there, and then they say, we don't want to give it the 5th overall pick. It's like, good. Davidson doesn't want to force a deal, and he's keeping his price high. And I think, when you're not necessarily shopping players, as was the case with Brandon Hagel, you have to set the bar high to be like, hey, if you want this player, he is available, but you have to blow me away with an offer. And I think in this situation, Davidson has leverage because they technically don't need to trade Alex DeBrincat. Like, they can live with the picks that they have and also have Alex DeBrincat on this roster and be totally fine with it. And I think that's the alternative situation of not getting in the first round this season by making this deal is you have Alex DeBrincat.
Well, I think he does and he doesn't to some extent because I really think he doesn't want to pay that $9 million qualifying offer. It's kind of, all right, do you keep DeBrincat into production, but there's also a cultural cost because he does so many things on the team and he leads by example. I mean, nobody quibbles with any part of his game, maybe his defense, but I mean, he puts in a great defensive effort for his size and his role. Mm-hmm. But when you think about what you can get for him, and the fact that Davidson doesn't want to spend a lot of money in the early part of this rebuild. I think there is a little bit of internal pressure that he's putting on himself to make this happen.
Well, you brought up we were talking before the show. You brought up a really good point too about, looking at the roster. If DeBrincat's gone, who's kind of there in the rebuild stage to kind of bridge the gap between being this is really bad and this is really good? And I think that was a really, good point of like, yes, you need good, you need veteran players on the roster, but you can't just have a veteran. You need someone who can lead a locker room.
Yeah, I mean, and some guys are like, I like to use the phrase, they're just built for it. Like Seth Jones, great player, but he's not a real demonstrative guy. I mean, in fact, his brother is probably more demonstrative, more of your kind of team locker room guy than Seth is. I don't think he would probably disagree with that. I think he's become more of that out of necessity. But you need more guys in that bridge than just Connor Murphy. I mean, a lot of guys respect Connor Murphy in the locker room. Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews obviously comes up, but their future with the franchise is up in the air. Are they going to mentally check out? Are they going to physically check out? In the case of Jonathan Toews, who's dropped a hint that he might want to leave, and Davidson may say, it's time to move on from this. So who's going to teach these young guys that Davidson wants to bring in? Who's going to be there?
Sam Lafferty.
Sam Lafferty and Tyler Johnson.
And future captain Reese Johnson. That's what Derek King said,
yes.
future captain.
Yes.
Oh, so your point about, Phil, this is something we haven't really talked about, is the fact that you just said that Kyle Davidson might not want to pay Alex DeBrincat $9 million to be here while the team gets pasted every night. Other teams might know that and say, look, they're going to play tough and they're going to act tough, but at the end of the day, we know that Kyle Davidson actually doesn't want to pay Alex DeBrincat a ton of money. So it's that game of chicken, right? The proverbial game of chicken, and way different situation. But we talked about this at the trade deadline. You didn't get anything for Calvin DeHaan, who you knew was probably leaving the franchise. There's been no indication he's coming back by any means. And he held tight. He stuck to his guns, probably set a price of, I want this much back, and if I don't get it, I'm not trading him. That's all great, but how many times can you get stuck with, playing too hard of hardball? And we have no evidence that that's what Davidson's doing yet, but it's just something to keep in mind that other teams know that he does not want to put that money towards Alex DeBrincat, so they can say, no, you're not getting a top 5 pick for Alex DeBrincat, because we know in reality you don't want to sign him. So that's kind of the game they have to play, and he has to play.
Well, I think that's a different conversation, too, when you're talking about a Calvin DeHaan and the DeBrincat,
of course.
obviously.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I'm not trying to be funny here. I think, we're around the team. We talk to DeHaan. We see his positive attributes and what he could bring to a team. But that market out there may say, we can find a lot of guys like that. That's why they can pass on him. I mean, look at Dylan Strome. How many times have they tried to, trade Dylan Strome, but couldn't find a taker? And you say, well, he played great with Kane and DeBrincat on that line. He's kind of resurrected his career, but, maybe Davidson was asking too much for him. But, you could probably say the same. I think Bowman was trying to, pass him off as well.
We're going to let that one slide.
Everybody gets one.
Let that one slide.
Everybody gets one.
He who shall not be
There you
named.
go. See, we already explained that.
Yeah.
I couldn't resist.
Yeah, no, that's a first. There he is, right there. He who shall not be named. That first one's free, but
Now you know. Now you
You'll
know.
be all right.
yeah.
You'll be all right.
Well,
Okay.
the whole reason we did that is because we were just tired of, Blackhawks fans in general, be it in our personal Twitters or on whatever, just constantly still complaining about he who shall not be named. I was like, he's gone. He can't hurt us anymore. It's time to move on. So that's why we're not even going to say his name on the show anymore to incite those types of things.
I'm sensing some group PTSD.
Big time.
Yes.
And you mentioned it earlier, because of how we've been conditioned the past decade, we're not used to the Blackhawks having the leverage in trade negotiations.
Yes.
This is not something we're used to.
Being able to be the team that can say,
That
hey,
can hold
we'll help you out if you give us something sweet.
Exactly.
They've been on the other end
We're
of it.
used to having to deal out of desperation and everybody else knowing it and then taking advantage of. Now we're the team that could take advantage of some of these desperate teams and get something for it. It's a weird situation to be in when you're used to being on the other side of that coin, but it's good. Embrace it. It's okay.
That's an excellent point, but it came to the point where you had to be willing to obliterate the team to have that kind of leverage.
Well, and I'm okay with that.
I'll hold a gun to myself. I'm holding myself hostage.
I am personally a big fan of scorched earth Kyle Davidson.
Yes,
Burn it all down. It's time.
Yeah.
It is time. Hanging on to what got us all that success in the early 2010s is why we're in this situation now. So it's time to just start over.
And I think the fans are ready for it, too, because we haven't gotten a chance to talk about it. It's been a busy week, but The Athletic just published their Blackhawks fan survey results, and something like 73% said they were ready for a full rebuild. I never thought I would hear that, but people have seen that the patchwork thing doesn't work. They've been trying that for the last 4 or 5 years, and it just has not worked out that way. So I think the fan base is on board, and that also gives Kyle Davidson some slack to say, all right, well, if the fan base is mostly on board, and he shouldn't worry about the fans, let's say that for sure. He knows he's got a couple years here to work and doesn't have to panic and get things done perfectly right away. But people seem to like the hire. They seem to like the Luke Richardson hire. They seem to like Kyle Davidson so far. So they've got some goodwill built up, and I think the fans will have some patience with whatever they decide, including Alex DeBrincat, especially if the return is so big. Yesterday's show, we had a question in the chat about Connor Murphy's value. Yesterday's show, we spent a lot of time sort of evaluating the value of these guys, but I'd like to get your take on that too, Phil. And we've been saying already, you got to have some veterans on the team, but Connor Murphy's another guy who a lot of teams around the league will look at, a very affordable deal with a lot of term left on it. What do you see happening with Connor Murphy?
I don't know that Connor Murphy is going to give you the value back for what you would lose from the team.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It could be because as a reporter, I really like his candor and, just how he breaks things down, and he tells you things unvarnished. And I get a sense that he does that in the locker room too, and that he really feels the losses. And I think that could be a bridge too far, especially when you have a lot of young defensemen that are going to need somebody that shows them the nuts and bolts of playing a very nuanced game.
Yeah.
Not saying that he is like all world or anything, but I mean, I think he plays the game or his game with integrity. So, giving him up for probably not a lot of return may be a bridge too far for me.
Yeah, and I think, too, you do have a lot of young defensemen that look promising that are going to be coming up, but you can't just trade away all the veterans to open up spaces for all these young guys and then have no one to help bring them along. And I think Murphy is one of those players that, to what we were saying before about needing players that can help bring, bridge that gap between the team being really bad and being really good. Murphy's one of those players that I think, what he can do both on the ice and in the locker room is pretty important.
But here's the thing. At the same time, Davidson has said that he's going to give guys as much time as Rockford is needed, implying that, more than his predecessor would.
There you go.
You're getting it.
Catching on.
Catching on. I'm a little slow here, but that he's going to give them as much time as he needs and then probably give them a little more time to make sure that they're seasoned enough. So who's going to be on the ice? If you're dispatching a lot of the veterans and you're saying that we're not just going to bring young guys up just to bring them up, you're going to have a bunch of rentals that you get off free agency, and he says he doesn't want to spend in free agency.
Yeah.
So is he just going to bring like just the dregs of NHL society to fill out a roster?
If you want Connor Bedard that bad, yes.
Yeah, time for
that's
yes,
true.
Exactly.
I mean, no Connor Murphy, no Alex DeBrincat. Your chances of getting Connor Bedard just got a whole lot better, and no goaltender.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah.
So I mean, Connor Murphy. It's an interesting. Somebody in the chat brought it up. Surfing Duck DB. I think that's it. Murphy's yet to show that he can get back to a high level after that nasty hit he had last year.
Yeah.
So I don't think his value is as high around the league as it is right now.
Exactly.
Plus, after having Luke Richardson here and in studio and talking to him, Connor Murphy sounds like the ideal Luke Richardson type of player, the guy that he wants here. So there's nothing wrong with having Connor Murphy here to start the season, and then he shows he can get back to that high level of play. Then maybe at the trade deadline, when teams are far more desperate for defensemen and willing to overpay, maybe that's when you move him, or next offseason. But you're right. You got to have some veterans. Yeah, we have Jake McCabe here too. I don't think anybody's beaten down the Blackhawks door to get a shot at Jake McCabe. But Jake McCabe, we've talked about it here. He played really well the last 6 weeks of the season. I think it's just getting over the injury, coming on to a new team, coaching, all that stuff just piled on to a subpar season. But as there seemed to be more stability, he was their best defenseman the last month of the season, especially when Murphy was gone. So those two guys are really, with Seth Jones, is a really good way to start, to have coaches on the ice, guys that lead the young players, because there's so much more that goes into making the jump from the AHL to the NHL than what goes on the ice. You have to learn how to be a professional off the ice too. You got to learn to deal with media, because we're a bunch of jerks, and you got to learn how to, you got to go get your own apartment maybe for the first time in your whole life, figure out how to pay a cell phone bill, eat right, get to your workouts. There's so much stuff that goes into being a professional hockey player beyond what we see on the broadcast, that guys like Connor Murphy can take these guys under their wings, and that stuff's invaluable. So I'm not the guy that was willing to say, let's get Murphy out of here right now.
No, and I think we can qualify kind of everything we talk about with these Blackhawks players of value, DeBrincat and Murphy, and to a lesser extent, McCabe and so on and so on. The only reason you would consider any of these deals is if you're getting, like Phil said, a king's ransom in return, something that takes maybe cuts a year off your rebuild, right? If some team's willing to, we keep going back to Toronto with Connor Murphy. Toronto wants to get rid of Peter Mrazek. The Blackhawks have two empty spots, truthfully, in goal. The Hawks can help them solve that problem and then take back some assets in return. Maybe that late first-round pick and Mrazek for Connor Murphy in a third or something like that. That's the sort of stuff you think about. But unless it's something like that, then no, you're not just doing it for the sake of it. And beyond just like people to fill out the roster, I think some continuity is important too. Yeah. You can't just have a bunch of guys you've brought in as free agents as your veterans, and they're coming into Chicago for the first time too. You want to have some people here, that have been through it, that understand the city, that understand the culture, that can help these new faces, be them prospects, draft picks, or free agents, assimilate to Chicago and figure things out here. So by no means are any of the four of us really saying, like, trade everybody, screw the return. No. You got to be measured. You got to be, cerebral about these things. And if some team is willing to cut a year off your rebuild for a trade, then you think about it. And really only then. Yeah,
you compare it to the Brendan Hagel. None of us advocated trading Brendan Hagel.
Hell no.
We literally had a disclaimer. We love Brandon Hagel. But when you see that offer, you got to take it. So that's how I view these guys we're talking about here. I'm not saying, yes, let's get Connor Murphy, let's run him right out of town. But if somebody gives you that offer you can't say no to, you have to take it.
Yeah, and when you look at the reason that we're thinking, like, okay, move these guys and see what the return is, a lot of it is based off of the draft this year, next year, and setting up the future of the organization, rebuilding their prospect system. I don't know how deep you've gotten into the draft coming up here, but what do you expect, I guess, what would you expect the Blackhawks to do given, Davidson's expressed need or expressed desire to want to get into the first round? But do you also see a scenario in which they say, well, we got 5 picks in the second and third round, like they could maybe roll with that and think, hey, if we hit on some depth picks, we could be in a good position without having to force anything to happen?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Fortunately, I had a chance to talk to Mike Donahue, the amateur scouting director, and he really broke it down to me this way. He said, look, picks 20 through 50, maybe you can even say 55, historically, their value returns about the same. He broke it down to like generally you're going to get like a middle pairing or bottom pairing defenseman, or you'll get like a bottom six forward. And maybe there's a couple of inches height difference. Maybe the guy's a little bit faster in the 20 range than what you get at 50, but it's not going to be like one of those top of the lottery type of guys in terms of their difference in value. So unless there's a particular guy that Davidson really wants, I don't foresee them trying to jump in the first round just to say they got a first round pick. I mean, because he who shall not be named got he had a first round pick that honestly I don't think a lot of fans were blown away with. That guy. So I mean, what did you really accomplish? I will say there are some second round targets that he likes, and I think talking to him, if there's a run on centers, they may go defenseman, particularly if there's a guy that can join the rush, maybe be power play guy, even second power play unit guy. They see more value. Like the way he put it to me is, if they have their third rated defenseman still out there, and maybe their next center is 9th on their list, obviously you take the defenseman. And there was one in particular that, if you allow me to look at my phone, two guys that I wanted to mention. Noah Warren, he's a 6'5", right-handed shot defenseman, and you know how valuable a righty shot defenseman is. And Donahue compared to him. Well, you got to be careful with comps. He's
a similar player.
Yes, he said Eric Chernak type.
Okay.
So
Let's take one of those.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, if that guy's available, like even a facsimile of that in the second round, you get that guy. And then another one that I've been, maybe it's because I've been pumping him up because he's from Sudbury. Davidson's from Sudbury. Okay. David Goyette.
Making some connections.
Yeah, I'm making some connections that if Goyette falls, now Donahue thinks that he might go by the 25th pick, but if he somehow does fall, I don't see Davidson resisting.
No, that's a guy I've looked at too, and that's a guy that if he's there at that first pick, the Blackhawks. You hear teams this time of year saying best available player. The Blackhawks literally can do that because they need everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we know they've got their best prospects that aren't Lucas Reichel or all defensemen, but are any of those guys Norris Trophy winners? Probably not.
No.
Are any of those guys top pairing defensemen? Probably not. I mean, if you squint hard enough, maybe one of those guys, but there's no superstar.
They have a lot of good number 4 options.
Yeah. Yeah, they have a guy, yes. So if they take a defenseman with that first pick or even any of those first couple of picks, I'm sure a lot of people are going to be like, oh, what the heck, we've got defensemen. But A, you can never have too many of them.
No, of course.
And B, if it's the best player available, this is literally what the Hawks can do. Best guy out there because they need everything. Yes, they need dynamic forwards, but if you get another modern day and defenseman, especially right-handed shot with some size, Luke Richardson has mentioned size on defense a lot already. So there's very few wrong ways they can go here. Just get the best player available. Kyle Davidson looks like he is a guy that will listen to his scouting staff, which again, we're not used to that. It's not he who shall not be named saying, having all his scouts say, take this guy. And he goes, nope, I'm taking that guy. So it's going to be very intriguing to see. I think we're going to get our first real idea of what Kyle Davidson envisions the future of this team looks like by the types of players he takes.
I'm glad you brought that up. And you guys have been there. Did you read between the same lines that I read that the way that he who shall not be named structured his whole scouting system and the information flow is that so everything would come through him and that he was the arbiter of all these decisions, whereas Davidson wants to make it more egalitarian. Everybody has the same information.
Very little ego there.
So he can be challenged if he needs to be challenged, whereas the other person wanted all the information coming through him.
Yeah.
Did you sense that?
Of course, yeah. And what I love about that, and just take hockey out of it, any sort of major management role, a good manager hires people that he or she trusts to do the work and trust their analysis, right? Like, so bringing in Jeff Greenberg and bringing back Norm McIver and all these things that he has done should put him in the position, like, a GM's got a million things to do aside from drafting or free agency or whatever. Rely on your amateur scouts for the draft. Rely on your pro scouts for free agency. Get together as a group, come up with a plan. It is such an obvious way to do business instead of, okay, everybody email me what they have found and I will sort through it all and make the best decision for all of us. No, that's why they call it a war room. There should be a group of people in there. Every pick that's made, now what? What's the scenario now? And everybody should be on the same page before the draft begins. I can't tell you over the last few years how many mid-draft texts I've received from folks in the organization with just the eye roll emoji or the, oh my God, this is not what anyone wanted sort of a thing. It's frustration because, look, you've got your amateur scouts doing the work and they go, we have agreed. This is the way to go. And nah. I'm going to go this way.
Yeah, this guy went to Notre Dame. I went to Notre Dame. Let's take him.
Well, that's never a bad idea. But Nolan Allen, Nolan Allen's a great example.
Opinion.
Nolan Allen could have been there in the second round, maybe the third round, but he just got this thing in his head that Nolan Allen was his guy, and he could not be convinced otherwise. Look, we've not even seen a Kyle Davidson draft yet, and maybe those eye roll emojis pour in during this draft too. But so far, so good with everything he's done. It just what he is saying makes perfect sense. Now it's up to him to actually follow through on what he's saying and behave that way as a GM, and we're about to find out. We're a little bit behind on our ad copy. See a ton of new people, by the way, in the chat today, which is great. Thank you for jumping in. We see a lot of the classic CHGO YouTubers like Jason, Chucko Mucko, Narfin, Surfin' Duck, all you guys. But I saw a bunch of new names in there today. Thank you for joining in. We greatly appreciate it. And stick with us. We're here 5 days a week. And if you're really enjoying CHGO, the best way to help us continue to grow is to download that PointsBet app and use the code CHGO when you sign up. Not only will you get 2 risk-free bets up to $2,000, but if you make a $50 or more first-time deposit, you'll get a free CHGO membership, which unlocks all of our great web content, and you'll even get a free shirt of your choice from the CHGO locker. Any questions on any of this, we are easy to reach. PointsBet at allchgo.com. They can help you get sorted out. If you've never downloaded an app like PointsBet before, reach out to them. They'll help you get started from start to finish. And remember, you no longer have to go to the sportsbook and get on their Wi-Fi to download the app. You can do it from your couch, from your shower, from your bed, wherever you're at. You can download the PointsBet app from start to finish and get the whole thing done in a matter of minutes. You'll be signing up at the fastest sportsbook, easier than ever, so you can start living your bet life in seconds. So what are you waiting for? Once the game starts, don't just bet. Live your bet life with PointsBet. And if you or someone you know has a gambling problem and needs help, call 1-800-GAMBLER for crisis counseling and referral services.
And as Kyle Davidson and his crew try to get a competitive edge for the Chicago Blackhawks going forward, you could start your day with a competitive edge by going and paying a visit to our friends over at Strava Craft Coffee. Strava CBD coffee is a game changer and has helped thousands of people improve their overall wellness and quality of life. I'm one of those. Big fan. Strava delivers delicious, fresh roasted specialty coffee infused with organic broad spectrum CBD. The CBD from hemp doesn't make you high or hungry, but it does offer you some really good benefits that can help you, such as feeling more alert and focused without all the jitters. You'll be able to live your day more balanced with less anxiety and fewer aches and pains. Plus, including CBD in your daily routine can even help you enjoy a more restful night of sleep so you can wake up feeling your best to start the day. Strava's all about quality. Everything is small batch, it's fresh, and it's shipped straight to your door. Plus, CHGO listeners can save 25% off their entire order just by using the promo code CHGO25 at checkout. That's 25% off your order at Strava, STRAVA, craftcoffee.com when you use that promo code CHGO25 at checkout. And if you already love Strava, and we've been raving about it for so long, if you haven't tried it, What are you waiting for? But you can join the Strava Coffee Club and subscribe and save. With Strava, you're in control. You'll save on all your favorite coffees and have them automatically delivered to your home or office on your preferred schedule.
Our guest in studio is Phil Thompson from the Chicago Tribune. Thanks again, everybody who joined us on YouTube. And if you're listening on the podcast, we appreciate that. Make sure you smash that subscribe button, as the kids say, so you get those that podcast every time it goes live. Phil, we have not spent a lot of time today or recently really talking about the locker room dynamic with Patrick Kane and probably more specifically Jonathan Toews. Patrick Kane has, for the most part, been a good soldier and has, said, hey, whatever happens, I'm here. I'm just going to do my job. I'm going to go about my business. But Toews has been pretty vocally unhappy about the whole process of a rebuild and the way things have gone in the last few years. How do you see him, existing in this world of what this roster could potentially look like next season? There's a good chance, maybe 50-50, maybe more, that Alex DeBrincat is traded within the next 24 hours. And if Jonathan Toews' response to the Brandon Hagel trade was what it was, what's it going to be to the Alex DeBrincat trade? And are we at a point now where having Toews around might be detrimental to some of the young guys on this team?
Oh, I don't know if I'm ready to say that.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say that.
You're in the room every day,
yes.
right? So I think that's one of the main reasons we want to have you here is what is the true dynamic? We only hear from Jonathan Toews when he talks in front of a mic, and usually when Toews talks, last year at least, something was going wrong. There weren't a lot of happy moments to talk about after games. So yeah, give us the insight about what it was like last year and what you think it could be next year.
I mean, obviously, a lot of these young guys still respect Toews.
Of course, yeah.
So, I think that Toews is always he's never been guarded about his displeasure when a trade is made, and he feels that it's robbing him of another opportunity to chase a cup with this franchise that and I think he wants to protect his legacy with this franchise. So I don't think he's going to risk becoming a cancer. Because he's already had some blowback about defending certain people.
Yeah.
But you can even go back to like the Gustafson and Robin Leonard trade. He was heated in the locker room after that, saying what are we doing? It's just a shot that somebody would be upset about Gustafson being traded as anybody. That would upset someone, but I mean, at the time he had a role. So then you see Hagel traded. If DeBrincat is traded, that might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. I can't say that he would just flip out in the locker room. Only he knows that. But I think we know enough to know that he's not going to hold back his comments. His first opportunity.
Yeah.
We've seen no indication that he wouldn't unload.
Well, and he'll be one of the first ones asked, too.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely.
And he should be.
Yes.
There were many times in just the brief time that I was on the beat that, he'd get out there and we'd be walking back to the media room going, he did it again. Like, thank you.
Yes.
We got our story.
Right.
It's a tough situation because, listen, and again, I've been critical of Jonathan Toews when need be, when he does things that you kind of probably don't want your captain to do. But he's wired differently. He's one of the most competitive guys on the planet. He's spent the whole first half of his career being one of the best players on one of the best teams. So it's tough to remove yourself from that. I get it. But, the reality of the situation is that, he's rounding third on his career and heading to home plate, to use a baseball reference, and this team's going in a different direction, and that's a tough pill to swallow. I understand that, but it's such and he's earned the right to be upset. He's earned the right to he's the greatest captain in team history. There's no doubt about that. He's going to have a statue one day in the atrium. There's no doubt about it, and he deserves all of it. But sometimes you just want to be like, oh, not again. And as we had a commenter earlier, I forget who said it, about would he ask to move his movement to go to Winnipeg? And I know people love, I don't know what it is about hockey that everybody has to go play.
You
in
just
their
play,
hometown.
go play in your hometown. It's fine.
It should only be teams should only draft players but.
Well, that Leafs roster is going to be huge.
Yeah. Stamkos is finally going to Toronto. But, and I know Winnipeg made sense for years and years, but right now, do the Jets want?
Everyone wants to leave Winnipeg now.
Right.
Yeah,
Like
right.
the Jets already have a roster full of declining, overpriced guy. What do they want another one for? It would surprise me, but never say never. As I've said for years, never underestimate the stupidity of an NHL general manager. Just when you think you got your thumb on it, somebody's going to go, what the heck was that?
Yeah, well, my fear, too, with Taves is, and look, I think we can all agree that the Jeremy Colton experiment was a bad one and would not have worked out regardless. However, him coming into a locker room with Taves and Keith and Seabrook clearly being unhappy about that situation didn't do Jeremy Colton any favors at all. He was up against it, and if I'm Philip Kurashev or random young Blackhawk and I see Jeremy Colton say something, I look over at Duncan Keith and Duncan Keith's rolling his eyes or not paying attention, who am I thinking? Who am I siding with, right? Duncan Keith or Jeremy Colton? That answer is simple. Now, I think Luke Richardson comes with a little more gravitas, and young players will look at him and say, hey, that's a guy who played 1,400 games, gave it all on the ice. There's chunks of that dude still, on the ice in Toronto and beyond, because that guy gave everything he had. So he's a little bit easier of a guy to listen to. But I just worry about that sort of toxic environment around young players.
I'm glad you mentioned Keith because, again, this is me being in the room reading a vibe. Nothing he said, but I got the feeling from Duncan Keith that he wasn't really interested in even hiding how he felt about Colliton.
Right.
That, I don't know if he felt Colliton was beneath him or he just tuned him out, but
Well, he was.
yeah.
I mean, that's a dynamic thing. That's when you have Duncan Keith going into the Hall of Fame, and then you have a coach that the biggest experience he had up to that point was one season in the AHL and coaching in Sweden, and his biggest playing experience was a handful of games in the NHL, mostly in the minor leagues. A guy who he's the same age as, I think. So it's just like for Duncan Keith to be like, well, what's this guy going to tell me that I don't already know? That's a big dynamic thing. And I think with Richardson coming in, you have a long established NHL career and a person who has worked their way through the coaching ranks.
You know what it's like to me? It's almost like a Jerry Krause, Tim Floyd type of dynamic.
Right. Interesting.
Like, I'm going to bring it. This is my guy. I like this guy. And conventional wisdom in the whole world maybe say, what are you thinking? But I know better than everybody else. And I think just like how the Bulls reacted, I think that's how the Blackhawks reacted.
Yeah, we'll show you.
That is the MO of he who shall not be named, or at least it was in recent years, is I'm going to show you that I'm smarter than everybody and go against convention and make the reach draft pick and hire the coach that, for this team full of Hall of Famers, I'm going to bring in this kid, basically, to coach them. It's just, it was always, look how smart I am, look how forward thinking I am.
Yes.
Sometimes the obvious move is the move to make. It's obvious for a reason. A little bit of an update here. Pierre LeBrun just published this to The Athletic. A little bit of an update on the DeBrincat stuff. Nothing crazy. He says, sources shared Wednesday the teams were starting to put their best trade offers forward to the Blackhawks on Alex DeBrincat, a potential trade that would most likely require a Thursday first-round pick included in it. So there's a pressure point developing there on that front. So things are starting to heat up. Nothing really specific there. Nothing really earth-shattering, but confirmation from one of hockey's most plugged-in insiders that teams are starting to go to Kyle Davidson with their best offers.
And what's interesting is as we approach Thursday night, 6 o'clock, watch us here on CHGO Sports YouTube. We will be live for the first round of the draft tomorrow night.
I'll do my hands.
What's interesting is I feel as if a deal's not made by the start of the draft, and then we get through picks 1, 2, 3, 4. If he's not traded at that point, DeBrincat's going to be on the roster.
That's how it feels.
And I really feel like we're getting to a point where Kyle Davidson might just not be blinking, and if we're at a point where those picks get made or traded with other teams, whatever ends up happening, I think we might be getting to a point where DeBrincat just the deal wasn't what Davidson wanted to. He stuck to his price point. And another thing too, I think that we mentioned a little bit was the indecisiveness of Montreal. because it doesn't seem like Shane Wright is slam dunk number one anymore. That might be playing into to what happens with the second pick or the third pick or the fourth pick, where the Blackhawks may still have kind of a target to get into that first round area.
I'd like to bolster that point and then also throw in an anecdote if you'll indulge me.
Yeah, go for it.
You know, from talking to Donna, he is in the article posted today on ChicagoTribune.com. Shameless plug.
Go check it out.
Do it.
Yes.
We're all shameless here.
Shameless plug. He looks at this draft, talking about Donahue, the amateur scouting director, as not having many or probably any proven generational players versus next year, which he can name at least 3 and said maybe another 2 to 3 will emerge. So his view is there isn't as much urgency to move up in this draft.
Okay.
You know, especially if you're talking about giving up an Alex DeBrincat.
Yeah,
like, what are you getting back, even if you do get a high-round pick? The little funny anecdote that I want to share with you guys, because I think you would appreciate it, again, in the article. He says that, talking about Donahue, that he welcomes the naysayers and the draft trolls because he wants apologies 4 to 5 years from now.
Oh, nice.
And
I like that.
He wants to, you know, go to the United Center, have all these draft trolls in the seats, give them a microphone so he can just tell them off.
I love
In
that.
4 to 5 years.
I love
It's a classic
He's
heel
got the
move.
list like Chris Jericho.
Yeah.
You
Checking
made the
people
list.
off.
And
You just
and he's telling me this in this thick Boston accent. He sounds like that, you know, your cousin from Boston,
Yeah.
you know, Sam Adams ads. So
Yeah.
I'm like, this just goes perfectly with this guy's personality.
I love that.
We had actually talked about that yesterday. This is going to be one of those draft classes that 5 years from now, you're going to be like, how did that guy go in the 4th round? Or why did that guy go in the 1st round? Because there's so much uncertainty. So many of these guys didn't play last year.
Yes.
The OHL did not have a season last year. A lot of these other leagues had very shortened seasons. So a lot of these guys lost in a complete year of development that they're just getting now. So guys that are taken in the 5th round could turn out to be 2nd round, 1st round talents as they get that year back. So this is a very crazy draft. They're all crazy, and you never know how good they are until 4 or 5 years down the road. But this is going to be that draft, not necessarily just for the Blackhawks, but league-wide. We're going to be watching all-star games in a few years going, how the hell was that guy taken 120th overall?
And we might see if this new direction, this mandate for speed really works for them because, you know, talking to those guys, Davidson, you know, Norm McIver and Donahue, speed is everything.
Yeah.
You know, if the guy doesn't have the best hands, they can work on it. If the guy doesn't have, you know, a perfect shot, they can work on it. But he's got to come in the door with speed. So,
Well, that's a good approach to have, especially when you watch the Colorado Avalanche, you watch the Stanley Cup players. Speed is good, but you got to have skill with that speed. We don't need a roster full of Victor Stahlbergs again.
yes.
He was super fast.
Yes.
And
then
handsome.
Yes, very handsome. And then he looked good in white dress shoes. But he was really fast getting to within 5 feet of the net. And then when he got within 5 feet of the net, it was like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, so, yes, speed is great. But you also got to be able to play at a high level to go with that speed. So that the Hawks do need to get faster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they need more skill too.
And I think there's a difference when
size.
and hopefully this is
than
something that the scouting department is looking at is there's a difference between players that just have straight line speed where they're just flying on the ice, you know. But there's a difference between that and playing the game fast. And I think maybe that's a little bit more of what they might be looking for. They're not necessarily looking for a burner down the boards, but a guy who can, you know, think the game fast and see it happening in front of him and be able to move with it rather than having to catch up to it. And I think that kind of plays into why potentially Dylan Strome might be on the outside of their plans because he's got great skill in his hands. It seems like he can read the game well. It's just he doesn't play very fast, and it might be that's the biggest factor in potentially saying, you know what, he may not fit what we're going to try and do. May not be the type of player that we're trying to build around. And I think that could be something that, when Norm McIver and Jeff Greenberg were introduced, Kyle Davidson said that, we're making some scouting changes. We're making some, or not Davidson, McIver said, we're making some changes in what we prioritize through scouting. And I hope that is the factor that they're looking at, is players who can play the game fast, not necessarily like, oh, they just have rocket skates.
Right. You gotta have a cerebral player as much as a raw talent player. You gotta have guys that can think and adapt as well. Coachable guys.
Well, I think on that front, it leads us very nicely to Kirby Dach, who you can see him on the ice thinking.
Yeah.
And whether that's a hockey sense situation or if it is a mental part of the game situation, they need to figure that out too, because I still think when we're talking about the most important pieces that are on the roster now, he's right there. If they can get him to develop into a good number 2 center, which I think is probably less than we thought he was when they drafted him 3rd, but if they can get him to be a 60, 65 point guy, that accelerates the rebuild too. But Phil, what have you seen from him just in the locker room? We know he deleted his social media. Derek King talked about him just kind of needing a mental break. Where's Kirby Dach mentally, and then as well as kind of on the ice?
Well, I want to clarify something. When we're talking about in the room, we're talking about in basically like the conference room that they allow me.
In the media room.
True.
In the
not
media
the
room.
locker
But
room.
it makes a
Auxiliary
difference.
locker room.
For sure. Yeah.
We're not able to see them at their lockers during this pandemic, or even the remnants of this pandemic. So, you have to judge based off of what you see during games, see during practice on the ice. I mean, he seems engaged, but I think you have a good point about him kind of overthinking things sometimes on the ice, where, a lot of times you would like him to pull the trigger, on a rush. Or, sometimes I wonder about his handles, they knock the puck off him pretty easily sometimes. You would think a guy with a big body would be able to, fend guys off a little better. But, and I don't want, at the risk of being a Dach apologist, between injuries and shortened schedules,
True.
his learning curve is behind. His availability on the ice, despite his years in the league, he still has time and room for development.
Yeah, he's only 21, so there's still time for him to get much better. I mean, we talked with Luke Richardson, and he certainly seems like a guy that isn't going to be a coach that says, this is how my system works.
Yes.
You adjust to it. He told that Chris Weideman story.
Yeah.
He looks like he coaches players on an individual level to say, okay, this is what you can do, so now I got to figure out how I can incorporate what you do into the team structure. A lot of people said Kirby Dach's a guy that could use a change of scenery. He's getting it without even leaving town.
Yes.
He's getting a guy that seems to be more into the coaching and development aspect with these guys. So I think Kirby Dach under Luke Richardson could be a very good thing. People want to give up on him already. And yes, it's been super disappointing. But it wasn't Kirby Dach's fault that he got drafted 3rd overall. It wasn't his fault that he got rushed to the NHL. It wasn't his fault that he suffered a just complete freak injury at the World Juniors. Maybe he shouldn't have been there, but that's another debate for another day. These things aren't his fault, and he looks like a player that has no confidence and thinks too much. And a hockey player that is on the ice thinking is a slow hockey player. Just that little beat, it can cost you. Instincts. He's got to work on he's got to play with his instincts. I think
He's got to trust his instincts.
Exactly, and that's hockey's so fast. Do what you did to get here. If you're going to be the dominant guy, be the dominant guy. If you're going to be the guy that sets up your teammates, be the guy that sets up. But just pick a lane and go with it. And I think Luke Richardson is a good guy to get him back on that path, and we'll see what happens.
You raise an interesting point. There's one thing I want to seize on that Mario and I were talking about beforehand. You were talking about, Richardson not being a coach that wants you to bend to his system. I'm going to fit you this round peg into a square hole. We were talking about Colin, and it seemed like, and maybe it's a dynamic because he was following at Quenneville, he felt like he had to establish authority. Coaches coach, players play.
Yeah.
Whereas on the other hand, you have a guy like Derek King, who is a nurturer, a jokester, eases the room. To a man, everybody said that he kind of relieves the tension. Maybe Richardson is the melding of the best qualities of those two. He has the gravitas without having to shake a stick. That guys will follow him, but at the same time, everybody that I talk to says that he really cares about his players and developing those players. Mm-hmm. So if you can find a guy that bridges both those gaps, maybe you have something there.
Yeah, and I think that definitely came across when we had him on the show. Was just it seemed like, if I were an NHL player in my wildest dreams, I would want
still
to.
Time.
Yeah, only 32. I would want to play for a coach that had that demeanor to where he can drive home a point. He can definitely get a message across and set a tone for what he has expectations for, but is also not just going to say get there on your own and figure it out. It'll be here's where we want you to be. Here's where we think you can go. Here's what we can do to work with you to get to that point. And it really seems like that is a big part of his coaching style. And I think that's going to be really important for all the young players as they develop. But talking about Kirby Dach, I think it's going to be really important for a player like him to be able to see the steps that he is taking, because he did start to take some towards the end of last season.
Yes.
In the right direction.
Yes.
Take those steps, build upon them, find the positives in those, and be able to use that as kind of a new base layer for his development, because like we mentioned, everything kind of got derailed with the broken wrist at the World Juniors, because he was stepping into that tournament as captain of Team Canada at the World Juniors, like about to be like the man, and then snap, everything kind of took a turn from there. So if Luke Richardson can unlock Kirby Dach's what's left of his major potential, I think that's huge. One thing that I think could help Kirby Dach in unlocking his potential
that smooth segue.
is getting himself some OWYN. OWYN stands for Only What You Need. It's a 100% 100% plant-based protein shake that gives you the nutrition that works just as hard as you do. All of OWYN's products are free of artificial ingredients. They are completely allergen-friendly. They do not contain any gluten or dairy. They are easily digestible. You may have heard about OWYN from Chicago Bears quarterback Justin Fields, who also follows a plant-based diet. And right now, OWYN and CHGO are partnering up to give you an awesome offer. You can get 20% off of your first purchase at liveowyn.com and use the promo code CHGO20. I myself try and cut out gluten and dairy as much as possible. I've also started trying to work out a little bit more regularly, and using OWYN has really helped me out. Cutting down on recovery time and just making me feel good after those workouts. So join myself and Justin Fields, one and the same when it comes to working out, and try OWYN. Again, OWYN, only what you need.
Hunter in the chat says he uses both OWYN and Strava and loves them both. So
he is just a well-oiled machine then.
Yeah, you got to be ripped and jacked at the same time. All right, one last question, Phil, before we let you go. Michael's asked in the chat, any hunch on what the Blackhawks do at goalie?
Well, I'm of the mind that they probably find something amenable to the long-term plan in the free agency market. But I get the feeling, because when we brought the subject up, I think the first name that Davidson mentioned was Arvid Soderblom. And I know Derek King said, like, hey, let's give this guy some leeway. So, I don't think Lankinen is – maybe they re-sign Lankinen, maybe they don't. I don't think he's the de facto starter next season, though. I think maybe they ride with Soderblom.
Interesting.
I don't know. You guys have a thought on this?
I mean, I like Soderblom. I covered a lot of Rockford games last year. I don't think he's ready for that yet. And with goalies, you got to be so careful, because we saw it with Lankinen. A goalie with no confidence is usually a bad goalie. And I think that was a lot of Lankinen's problem, as well as that hand injury that I don't think he ever fully recovered from. Personally, I have no problem bringing back Lankinen on a 1 or 2 year deal to say, hey, let's see what you got. And then bring in a veteran, like a 1A, 1B type of thing. Yeah. Maybe you take on that Peter Mrazek deal from Toronto. What's it going to hurt you? Again, you got to think to long-term picture. If you bring in Lankinen and Mrazek and they're both awful, start printing up those Connor Bedard jerseys. It's not the worst thing in the world. Being really awful this season kind of is what you want. I know they will never admit that. No. But it's kind of the goal.
They're not actively trying to lose, but they're also not
trying to win.
Trying to put ice the best team possible.
They're actively trying to not win.
Yeah.
Right.
There you go.
If I were a betting man, and sometimes on points bet I am, I would say Lankinen is back with one of those veteran guys. There's a lot of those, veteran free agent guys. Do you bring in Braden Holtby for a year at a cheap contract? Holtby has a really good year, and then flip him for an asset at the deadline. And then at that point, Soderblom has had 3/4 of a season in the AHL. And you bring him up and let him take it from there. That's not the worst idea in the world either. So there's options, and that will be fun to see what happens. But as I've said before, goaltending should be like way low on Kyle Davidson's priority list right now, especially right now. That should be like the last box he checks when building this roster, because it really doesn't mean a whole lot for 22-23.
That's like the kicker in your fantasy football draft.
Yeah.
God, I forgot to get a kicker.
Last round.
Well,
yeah. Well, and
I hate kickers.
And I think too, the outlook currently, I think, is giving a prospect like Drew Commesso enough time to develop to where once he makes the jump to the professional game, whether it's spending some time in Rockford in the AHL or heaven forbid throwing him right into the NHL right away, but it's just kind of biding their time until their best prospect that they have at that position is ready to go and make some sort of impact at the top level. And I think probably 2-3 years away from doing that. So if you have Arvid Soderblom, if you have Kevin Lankinen on a 2-3 year plan, I think that's probably the best you can hope for.
Yeah.
Without having to go too far outside of the organization, bringing in Mrazek, or I know Matt Murray with the Senators. There's been some conversations about making a deal that way, which also would have involved Alex DeBrincat. But there are options out there. But I think the long-term plan should be the book that Jay really likes, A Bridge to Commesso. I think that's the path that they're going on.
Wasn't Robert Redford in that
movie? I think he was. Yeah, that was a good one. Well, Phil, we told you the hour would go by fast. Thanks for joining us. Everybody make sure you're following Phil on Twitter at _Phil_Thompson. Very confusing. Thanks, Phil.
Yes,
that's great.
I know. I apologize.
We love it. Really easy to find. _Phil_Thompson. And we got to tell you, so the rest of the week, tomorrow, Thursday, we are live at 6 through the end of the first round.
6 p.m. Central.
We'll be on live during that show. We're going to talk to Joe Brand from WGN, the pre- and post-game host. We've got a couple other guests lined up. We've got Jack Bushman from Locked On Blackhawks. We've got Dave Melton from Second City coming on. Friday, we'll be live at 10 a.m. for rounds 2 and 3, where the Hawks have, at this point, 5 picks. Then we'll take a break. Once the draft completely concludes, we'll be back around 4:35 for our draft wrap-up show. We'll be joined by Colby Cohen, who, if you've forgotten, aside from doing Hawks games, covers NCAA hockey games, has his eye on the pulse of college and minor league hockey, so he'll have insight on a lot of these draft picks. That will be, look for it around 4 or 5 o'clock on Thursday on Friday as the entire draft wraps up. So tons coming the rest of this week. And remember, next week, Prospects Camp, free agency, we have got it covered unlike anybody else here at the CHGO Blackhawks podcast. So we want to thank Phil for coming in, and for Greg and Mario, I'm Jay. Thanks to Natalie for producing the show today, and thanks for listening to the CHGO Blackhawks podcast.